Hello everyone and welcome back to the ccubed channel. This is a tier 1 video. So this is meant to be for GCSE Maths Foundation students taking the EdXL exam board, and it's also for those who wish to start from the absolute basics. So today we're going to be branching on a bit further from solving equations as we've done in the last video, but we're now going to be taking it further to changing the subject of different formulas, or formulae I should say. This is a basic version of the session. There will be a more advanced one later down the road, where we will be looking at a bit more of different methods. There'll be more advanced methods using quadratics and stuff like that. But for now we're going to be taking a look at standard, basic stuff that branches off from solving equations. So these kind of examples shown in this slide here. So we're going to quickly recap on what we've done with solving equations. So remember, when we solve equations, we're trying to isolate x on its own when you have a situation like this, and we did that by shuffling the numbers around. So remember, if we want to get x on its own, we had to isolate the -2. So we moved that over, and that became a +2, because -2 plus 2 on this side is equal to 0, and on this side 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. So we're basically trying to get rid of the -2 by adding +2 to both sides. So I should make note, there's +2 there, and this end here, all this will be equal to 0. And then after, what we said was we multiply by 3 on both sides, so that we could get rid of this fraction, the 1/3. So then we'd be left with 2x is equal to 4 times 3, which is equal to 12. And then we said, if we want to get the x on its own, we have to divide by 2 after, so we can get rid of this 2. So x is equal to 6. Now, if you are still unsure about this, I would recommend going back on the previous video, look over that again, and do a bit more practice with other kinds of examples you can find, or just make up your own, because generally these are quite easy to make up. So I would personally, go over that before you go on with this kind of video. So let us begin by talking about changing the subject. So we have these different kinds of things, like formulae, which are kind of equations in their own right, but they contain a lot of different variables, a whole load of variables I should say, almost no numbers, that kind of thing. I mean, you could have numbers, depends, we'll see. But the idea of changing the subject is you want to isolate one of the many variables that you have. So that's what we call changing the subject. The subject in this case is the variable that you want to keep alone. So for example, x equals, or y equals, or t equals, those are all subjects. And that is what we're trying to aim for in this video. Now there's not too much to this, because it's basically kind of a repeat of the last video, but it's just looking at it in a different way, slightly. So let's do our first example here. So we have this formula here, zx plus y equals 2, and we want to make x the subject. So what we do, we basically just carry out the same procedures to make x equal to whatever. So what we do, we have to isolate x. So the first thing to do is we move the y over. So remember, we get zx I should say, plus y minus y to make that make this part equal to 0, and the other end we get 2 minus y. Okay, so now we're left with zx is equal to 2 minus y. That's what we are left with now. So next step now, to get x on its own, we have to divide everything by z. So what we do x is equal to, now on the left side we can just quite simply do zx divided by z is equal to x, as we've done in the last video. On the right side now, I'll make a distinction as a 2. Now we have to divide everything by z. So how do we write this? We do 2 minus y is all divided by z. Okay, so that is the expression that's kind of the general formula that we get now. We've made x the subject now. So the idea is that 2 minus y is all divided by z. So the division is usually the last step. Typically you would do the addition subtraction stuff first, and then you divide by whatever is, you divide by the coefficient at the end. That's the general structure of doing this. And this is now the new rearranged form of the formula. So we have now made x the subject, because it's now x equals. Okay, let's do another situation. So now we have to make y the subject. Okay, so in this case, we have to get y on its own. Now, we already do have y on its own here on the right side. We have y squared over t is equal to y. But the problem is that y appears in both cases, and we need it to appear in just one area and nowhere else. As example with here, x appears on the left and then nowhere else. So we need that to appear. We need that to happen here. So this can be done quite simply through two steps. First step, we need to get rid of this t. We have to move it to the other end. So remember, to get rid of anything in the fraction, we multiply both sides. So we're going to be left with y squared is equal to y t. So that's what we get now, yeah. Next step now is we have to now we can see y appears on both sides here. So what we can actually do is we can divide both sides by y, because they appear on both sides, appear in both cases. Now this will be more clear as I do this. So let's just quickly do it. So we're gonna do y. Actually, I could just do it right here. So we're gonna do divide by y and divide by y. So if you remember with indices laws, remember that y squared divided by y is simply just the same as the 2 powers here. So it's 2 minus 1. So we're just going to get y. Oh, that's a bad y. Do y on its own. And on the right, y divided by y is just 1. So you're going to be left with t. And in that, in the end, we just get y equals t. That's it. That's all we get. So that is quite simply all you get from that. We've rearranged the subject, we made y the subject, and now that is what we get on the left hand side there, and that is all there is to it. Okay, next one. Now this is a bit more tricky. The problem with this now is we have to try and make z the subject. Okay, so what we can do in this situation is we can kind of move some things over here. Now we have to try and rearrange some stuff now to get z on its own. So this is a bit more complicated. Now what we can do first is we should probably get the positive side to the other end first. So we're going to do ul is equal to u plus z squared over u. Now what we've done, we've quite literally taken the entire term here, and then we moved it to the other end. That's a bad arrow, but you know what I mean. And then we just added the plus to it. So basically, because this entire thing here plus that is equal to 0 on the left, and that's why it disappears here. Always keep that in mind. So now we have this form here, and now what we do is we can move the u over to the other end. So we're going to have ul minus u is equal to z squared divided by u. Yeah, oh god, I can't make that 2 any better. Oh, we definitely cannot. Alright, just leave it at that. But you get, it's the z squared basically. And now we have this form here. The next step would be now to multiply both sides by u to get rid of this u at the bottom. So let's quickly do that. Let's do a bit higher up actually, so I can make some space for the next bit. Now, if you wish to expand those brackets there, you can. And we've done that in the last video. We've seen how to expand that. So let's just quickly expand this out. So u times ul is equal to u squared L. Now remember, you got to use the indices laws as well. So this is all kind of a big, always keep in mind all the stuff in the previous videos. They all, can all kind of combine into this kind of thing here. So minus u times u equal to u squared. Now, I mean, you can do this if you want to. You don't have to. You could just leave it as that. But I'm just gonna leave it like this. Doesn't really matter. And then in the end, we're left with z squared. Now, we're gonna come to a new situation here. We now have a square. We haven't came across this yet in the last video, or this one. So, what do we do here? Well, we have a square. We have to get rid of this square. So, the best way to do this is when you have, let's say, 2 squared is equal to 4, because we know that's the case. If you want to get 2 on its own, you have to square root both sides, right? So square root of 4, so remember, like, the square root is the inverse of a square, basically, because the square root of 4 is 2. These two kind of, go together. So this here, this part here, square root of 4 equal to 2, is the inverse of 2 squared is equal to 4. So you probably have guessed it now. The idea is you have to square root the entire thing on both ends. So the left side, we just quite simply leave it as u squared L minus u squared. There we go. And then on the right side, z, now the square root of z, oh yes, a bad z. Square root of z squared is just quite simply z. When we look into surds in a future video, we'll come across this relationship again, but this is kind of just a quick, introduction to it, I suppose. So we're just gonna get z on its own, and now z is the subject, because z appears isolated on its own from everything else. So we're gonna look more into that in the next, in a future video with this, but that's kind of all there is to that. And we're gonna do one more thing involving the square root now. This is the final example. So we're gonna try and make x the subject. Alright. So quite simply, we could just, the first step is to get rid of that 3. That 3 is not going to help us at all. So let us quickly rearrange this to get 3 on its own. So square root of x is equal to v over 3. So remember, you divide both sides by 3, as we've done there. And now, you square both sides, because remember, as we've said, these two are inverses of each other. So if you have, if you want to go from a square root to a square, then, if you want, I'll say if you want to go from a square to a single number, you square root. And if you want to go from a single number to a square, then you just square both sides. Now that sounds a bit complicated, but I could just show it practically here. So if we want to get x on its own, we just quite simply have to square both sides. So square root of x squared is just x. And then on the right side, this will become v over 3 squared, which you can also write as just 3 squared over 9. So both methods work here. You just do them separately if you want to, but that's the general structure. So you actually have squared both sides here, as you can clearly see with this end at least. So that might be a bit confusing, but with enough practice doing these kind of things, you should be able to get it fairly well. Especially this kind of thing, you get more complicated stuff and it should be better in a way. So that is all I had to say on changing subjects for the basic stuff. We will come back to this in a future video for the higher tier things, and we're going to be looking at a more advanced version of this in the future. But that's all I had to say on this. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.